Life underwater had always made more sense to me than life on dry land. For 8 years, the deep, dark expanse of the ocean floor, surrounded by tons of steel and the immense pressure of the abyss, was where I found a peace that eluded me in the chaotic world above. The offshore research vessel, Deepwater Sentinel, was my second home, a place where my reputation as a lead submersible technician was forged in an unforgiving environment. I was 33, my hands calloused from years of working with heavy machinery, my eyes trained to spot the slightest anomaly. My crew respected me because I never asked them to do anything I wouldn't do myself, and they feared me because I never forgot a mistake. In our line of work, one oversight could mean catastrophic equipment failure or worse, loss of life. Forgiveness was a luxury I couldn't afford. My wife, Sarah, had once loved that intensity about me. We met 7 years ago at a tech expo in Denver, where she was managing public relations for a rival robotics company. She was everything I wasn't: vivacious where I was reserved, outgoing where I was solitary, a dreamer where I calculated risks. She brought a vibrant splash of color to my structured world, and I hope, brought stability to her often unpredictable one. Our son, Leo, was 5 now. He was a miniature version of my methodical nature, wrapped in Sarah's infectious curiosity. During my month-long offshore rotations, Sarah would send me videos of Leo building elaborate contraptions with his advanced robotics kits, displaying the same patient precision I used to assemble complex subsea equipment. These glimpses of home were my lifeline during the isolating stretches of deep-sea work. But lately, something has shifted in those videos. Sarah seemed distracted, her smiles not quite reaching her eyes. Our video calls grew shorter, punctuated by awkward silences, where once our conversations had flowed effortlessly. When I questioned her about it during my last shore leave, she blamed stress from her new role at Fusion Dynamics, a cutting-edge tech startup where she'd started 6 months ago after her previous company underwent a major restructuring. I'd met Sarah's new boss, Bryce Maxwell, at a company holiday party. Everything about the man had set my teeth on edge. From his perfectly tailored suit and designer watch, to the way his eyes seemed to linger a little too long on Sarah, Bryce was the kind of slick, silver-tongued executive who'd never broken a sweat doing real work. The type who made million-dollar decisions from climate-controlled offices while others risked their lives in extreme conditions. But Sarah had laughed off my concerns. "You're being paranoid, Matt," she'd said playfully, nudging my arm. "Bryce is just enthusiastic about work. You know how these tech moguls are." No, I didn't know, and that was precisely the problem. Now, as I stood on the Deepwater Sentinel's observation deck, watching the crimson sun dip below the endless Pacific horizon, I felt the familiar weight of intuition that had kept me alive in countless dangerous situations. Something was profoundly wrong at home, and every instinct screamed that Bryce Maxwell was at the heart of it. My operations manager, Marcus Mac Henderson, joined me at the railing. Mac was one of the few men I genuinely respected, a 30-year veteran who'd started on the rigs when safety was an afterthought, surviving through pure instinct and an iron will. "You've been distracted lately, Matt," Mac observed, his weathered face creased with concern. "Everything all right at home?" I considered the question. In my world, you didn't share personal problems. Weakness was contagious and deadly. But Mac had earned the right to ask. "Just a feeling," I said finally. Mac nodded. In our business, feelings were data. Intuition kept you alive when instruments failed and protocols broke down. "Take some personal time when we rotate back," Mac suggested. "Sometimes you need to go ashore and handle things before they handle you." I was about to respond when my satellite phone rang. Personal calls during rotation were rare, and usually they signaled an emergency. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. "Matt Davis," I answered. "Mr. Davis, this is Agent Ramirez with Child Protective Services. I'm calling about your son, Leo." The world seemed to tilt. I gripped the railing, the cold steel digging into my palm, as the woman's voice continued, professional but urgent. Leo was found wandering downtown around midnight. He was alone, disoriented, and when we asked where his mother was, he said, "Mom's friend told me to get out." In the background, I could hear my son crying, not the normal tears of a child, but the broken sobs of someone whose world had shattered. "I want my daddy," Leo's voice echoed through the phone. "I want to go home." Mac took one look at my face and was already moving toward the communication center before I could speak. Within minutes, the emergency helicopter was being prepped for an unscheduled extraction. As I gathered my gear, my mind was already working with the cold precision that had kept me alive in countless emergencies. Sarah and Bryce thought I was trapped at sea, helpless and unaware. They had no idea what was coming for them, but they would learn. The helicopter ride back to shore gave me 90 minutes to think, and that was 90 minutes too long. By the time we touched down at the mainland helipad, I'd constructed and discarded a dozen scenarios, each one darker than the last. The reasonable explanations, medical emergency, family crisis, misunderstanding, evaporated when I replayed Leo's words. Mom's friend told me to get out. Agent Ramirez met me at the child services office, a tired woman in her 50s whose eyes held the kind of compassion that came from seeing too much. Leo ran into my arms with a desperation that broke something fundamental in my chest. "Daddy," Leo sobbed, his small hands clutching my shirt as if afraid I might disappear. "I was scared. It was dark, and I couldn't find Mommy." I held my son while Agent Ramirez explained what they knew. A security guard at a downtown tech campus had found Leo around midnight, still in his dinosaur pajamas, wandering the parking garage. He was dehydrated and exhausted, but physically unharmed. When questioned, Leo could only say that Mom's friend had told him to leave the house and that Mommy was too busy to take care of him. "We've been trying to reach your wife since 2 a.m., Agent Ramirez said. Her phone goes straight to voicemail, and there's no answer at your home address." I knew why. Sarah thought I was safely offshore, incommunicado for 3 more weeks. She and Bryce were probably celebrating their freedom, oblivious to the fact that their carelessness had just exposed everything. "Can I take him home?" I asked. "Of course. We'll need to follow up. But given the circumstances and your work schedule, we understand this might be complicated." I signed the necessary paperwork, my signature steady despite the cold rage building in my chest. As we drove home in my old Ford F-150, still parked at the helipad from my last shore leave, Leo fell asleep in his car seat, emotionally exhausted. The house was dark when we arrived at 3 a.m. I carried Leo inside, noting details with the methodical attention that had made me exceptional at my job. Sarah's sleek electric car was gone. Her favorite overnight bag was missing from the closet. Most telling, the expensive bottle of vintage single malt whiskey I had been saving for our anniversary was gone from the kitchen counter. I put Leo to bed in his own room, then systematically searched the house. In Sarah's dresser, hidden beneath rarely worn formal clothes, I found a burner phone. The text history was brief but damning. Bryce, "Coast clear tonight. Matt's offshore for 3 weeks. Sarah, finally. Can't wait to be free of this charade. Bryce, about time. Pack what you need. We'll figure out the kid situation later. Sarah, he's asleep, won't even know I'm gone." I sat in my dark living room, Leo's steady breathing audible through the baby monitor, and let the rage settle into something colder and more dangerous. Sarah hadn't just cheated. She'd abandoned our child to pursue her affair. In my world, that was unforgivable. I picked up my phone and called Sarah's regular number. It went to voicemail just as Agent Ramirez had said, but I knew she'd check her messages eventually. "Sarah, it's Matt. I'm home. Leo's with me. When you're done with whatever you're doing, we need to talk." The message was calm, even casual. Let her think she still had time to construct a story. Next, I called my lawyer, Ben Carter, waking him despite the early hour. Ben had handled my contracts and insurance policies, but more importantly, he was one of the few people who truly understood my methodical nature. "Matt, Jesus, what time is it?" "Ben, I need you to start divorce proceedings. Abandonment, adultery, whatever gives me full custody of Leo." There was a pause. "What happened?" I explained the situation in clinical terms. Ben, to his credit, didn't waste time on sympathy or platitudes. "I'll start the paperwork, but you need to be careful here. Document everything, but don't do anything that could hurt your custody case." "I understand." "Matt, I mean it. I know how you operate on the rig. Absolute control. Zero tolerance for mistakes. This is different. The law doesn't always reward the person who's right." I ended the call without responding. Ben was a good lawyer, but he didn't understand the fundamental truth I learned in my dangerous profession. Sometimes, The law was a luxury you couldn't afford. As dawn broke, I prepared breakfast and woke Leo gently. My son was confused but reassured by his father's presence. We ate together in comfortable silence until Leo asked the question I had been dreading. "Where's mommy?" I looked into my son's trusting eyes and made a decision that would define everything that followed. "Mommy made some bad choices, buddy, but daddy's gonna make sure you're safe." "Is she coming back?" My voice was steady as steel when I answered. "Not if I can help it." Sarah finally called that evening, her voice tight with panic when I answered on the first ring. "Matt, what are you doing home? You're supposed to be on the rig for 3 more weeks." "Emergency extraction," I said calmly, settling into my living room chair where I could watch Leo playing with his building blocks. "Our son was found wandering the streets at midnight. Funny thing, you weren't here." The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. When Sarah spoke again, her voice had shifted into the defensive tone I'd heard when she was caught in smaller lies. "I had a work emergency. Bryce needed me to handle a crisis client. I arranged for Mrs. Henderson next door to watch Leo, but she must have fallen asleep." I almost admired the smoothness of it. Mrs. Henderson was 73 and had been in the hospital for hip surgery for the past 2 weeks. A fact Sarah would know if she'd been home. "That's strange," I said. "Mrs. Henderson's been in the hospital since last Tuesday. I called to check." Another pause. "Matt, I can explain everything. I'll be home in an hour. No rush. Leo and I are having a good time. We might even order pizza." I paused. "Sarah, one more thing. I found your burner phone." The line went dead. I smiled grimly and went to join my son, who was building an elaborate rocket with the methodical precision that reminded me of myself at that age. We played together until Leo's bedtime. I read him the same adventure stories about brave astronauts that my own father had read to me. After Leo was asleep, I sat at my computer and began the methodical research that was my specialty. Bryce Maxwell, I discovered, was more interesting than his polished surface suggested. The man had worked for 5 different tech startups in 7 years, always leaving under vague circumstances involving restructuring or strategic realignment. His LinkedIn profile was carefully curated, but employment gaps suggested a pattern of instability that his expensive wardrobe and confident manner concealed. More interesting was Bryce's current financial situation. A deep dive into public records revealed a man living far beyond his legitimate means. A downtown penthouse apartment, luxury car payments, and exclusive club memberships that would strain even a successful marketing director's salary. Either Bryce had family money, or he was financing his lifestyle through means that wouldn't survive close scrutiny. I was still researching when I heard Sarah's car in the driveway at 11 p.m. I remained seated at my computer as she entered, noting how she'd taken time to change clothes and fix her appearance before coming home. Even now, she was trying to control the narrative. "Matt, we need to talk." I turned to face her, my expression neutral. Sarah looked beautiful as always, but I now saw the calculation behind her smile, the way she positioned herself to appear vulnerable and contrite. "I'm listening. Things have been difficult lately. You're gone so much, and I've been lonely. Bryce, it started as just friendship, but I won't lie to you anymore. I have feelings for him." I nodded as if she'd reported the weather. "And Leo, I never meant for him to be affected. Bryce and I just needed some time to figure things out. I thought Mrs. Henderson was watching him." "You thought a woman who's been in the hospital for 2 weeks was watching our son?" Sarah's mask slipped slightly. "I made a mistake. People make mistakes, Matt." "No," I said quietly. "You made a choice. You chose to abandon our child to spend the night with your lover. That's not a mistake. That's who you are." "Matt, please. I know this is hard, but we can work through this. Marriage, counseling, whatever you need." I stood up, and something in my movement made Sarah take an involuntary step backward. In the dangerous world of offshore deep-sea exploration, I had learned to project absolute authority when lives were at stake. That same presence now filled the room like a gathering storm. "Sarah, I want you to listen very carefully. You have until tomorrow evening to pack your personal belongings and leave this house. I've already filed for divorce and full custody. If you contest it, I'll make sure every detail of how you abandoned our son becomes public record." "You can't do this." "I have rights. You forfeited those rights when you left Leo alone to pursue your affair. Ben Carter will explain the legal details tomorrow." Sarah's composure finally cracked. "You bastard. You think you can control everything. Just like on your precious research vessel. Well, Bryce and I won't be intimidated by your threats. I smiled, and Sarah took another step back. Good. I was hoping you'd involve Bryce in this conversation. In fact, I insist on it. Something in my tone made Sarah's anger falter. What do you mean? Tell Bryce I'd like to meet with him. Man to man. Matt, you can't. I can't? What, Sarah? Have a conversation with the man who's sleeping with my wife? The man who helped convince you to abandon our son? My voice remained conversational, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Tell Bryce that Matt Davis would very much like to discuss the future with him. Sarah backed toward the door, her instincts finally registering the danger that my calm demeanor concealed. I'll send Bryce's address to your phone, I continued. We'll meet tomorrow evening, 8 o'clock. Matt, this is insane. You can't threaten people. I'm not threatening anyone, Sarah. I'm simply suggesting that Bryce and I need to have a discussion about boundaries and consequences. After all, he's been making decisions that affect my family. It's only fair that I get to make some decisions that affect his. Sarah fled the house, and I listened to her car speed away into the night. I checked on Leo, who was sleeping peacefully, then returned to my computer to continue my research on Bryce Maxwell. By dawn, I had compiled a comprehensive profile of my target. Bryce's financial instability, his pattern of workplace departures, his expensive lifestyle, and most interestingly, his complete lack of experience with truly dangerous men. I'd spent years working with people who understood that some lines, once crossed, led to consequences that no amount of charm or money could undo. Bryce was about to receive an education in those consequences. The game was no longer about saving my marriage or protecting my feelings. This was about protecting my son and ensuring that the people who had threatened Leo's safety understood the price of their choices. I picked up my phone and began making calls to colleagues who owed me favors, men who worked in industries where problems were solved with methods that corporate executives never encountered. Bryce Maxwell had no idea what was coming for him, but he was about to learn that some depths were too dangerous to explore. Bryce Maxwell lived in a downtown penthouse that screamed new money and insecurity. I observed the building from across the street, noting the minimal security, the single entrance, and the parking garage that would provide perfect privacy. Everything about Bryce's choices suggested a man who'd never considered that his actions might have consequences he couldn't charm or buy his way out of. I'd spent the day making arrangements. Leo was staying with Mac Henderson's wife, Linda, who'd raised 3 boys, and understood that sometimes emergencies required flexibility. Linda had asked no questions when I explained I needed to handle some urgent business related to Sarah's departure. That boy's got good bones, Linda had said, watching Leo build a fort in their living room. Don't you worry about him. Some situations need handling before they get worse. Linda understood. Mac had told her enough stories about my methodology that she knew this wasn't about emotion or revenge. This was about eliminating a threat to my family with the same systematic approach I used to prevent catastrophic deep-sea equipment failures. At 7:45 p.m., I entered Bryce's building through the parking garage. The security system was laughably inadequate. A basic keypad that I bypassed with tools I'd acquired during my years working around sophisticated electronic systems. I took the elevator to the 20th floor, my movements calm and purposeful. Bryce answered the door wearing an expensive silk shirt and the kind of confident smile that suggested he still thought this was a negotiation between civilized men. Matt, come in, come in. Sarah told me you wanted to talk. I have to say, I admire a man who can discuss things rationally. I stepped into the penthouse, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows, expensive furniture, and the bottle of whiskey on the coffee table, the same vintage I'd been saving for my anniversary. Bryce had opened it, a deliberate insult that confirmed everything I needed to know about the man's character. Nice place, I observed. Must be expensive on a marketing director's salary. Bryce's smile faltered slightly. I've been fortunate with investments. I moved to the windows, looking down at the street 20 floors below. You know, Bryce, I spend most of my time working at depths where a single mistake can kill you instantly. It teaches you to be very careful about risk assessment. I'm sure it does. Look, Matt, I want you to know that Sarah and I never intended for things to develop the way they did. These things just happen sometimes. I turned from the window, my expression unchanged. Things like abandoning a 5-year-old child so you could spend the night together. Bryce's confidence was visibly cracking. That was a miscommunication. Sarah thought she'd arranged supervision. Sarah thought a hospitalized woman was watching my son. But you know what I think, Bryce? I think neither of you gave a damn what happened to Leo as long as you got what you wanted. Now wait, just a minute. I moved with the sudden efficiency of a man accustomed to emergencies. Bryce found himself pressed against the window, my hand gripping his expensive shirt, the city lights spinning dizzily below. Let me explain something about consequences, Bryce. In my line of work, carelessness doesn't just get you fired, it gets people killed. So we have zero tolerance for individuals who put others at risk through their selfishness. Bryce's face had gone pale, his earlier confidence evaporating as he realized I wasn't here for a civilized discussion. Matt, please, let's talk about this reasonably. I am being reasonable. Reasonable would be ensuring that the people who endangered my son understand that their actions have permanent consequences. I released Bryce, who stumbled backward, his shirt torn and his composure shattered. Here's what's going to happen, Bryce. You're going to end your relationship with my wife immediately. You're going to find employment in another city, preferably on the other side of the country, and you're going to pray that I never have reason to think about you again. Bryce straightened his shirt, some of his arrogance returning. You can't threaten me. I'll call the police. I smiled, and Bryce took an involuntary step backward. Go ahead. Tell them that Matt Davis visited you to discuss your affair with his wife. Tell them how you helped convince that wife to abandon her child. See how sympathetic they are to your situation. Bryce's bravado crumbled. Sarah said you were controlling, but this is insane. No, Bryce, insane would be what I do if you don't follow my suggestions. You see, I've spent the day learning about your financial situation, your expensive lifestyle, your pattern of leaving jobs under mysterious circumstances, your complete lack of legitimate means to afford this place. Bryce's face went white. You can't. I can. And I have. It's amazing what you can discover about someone when you apply the same attention to detail that keeps people alive in dangerous situations. Would you like to know what I found? Bryce sank into his expensive couch, the fight gone out of him. I found a man living far beyond his means, with gaps in his employment that suggest interesting survival strategies. I found financial records that don't quite add up, and business relationships that might not survive close scrutiny. I moved to the coffee table and picked up the open whiskey bottle. My whiskey in Bryce's apartment shared with my wife. But here's the most interesting thing I discovered, Bryce. You have no idea how to handle truly dangerous people. Your entire life has been about manipulation and charm, dealing with people who fight with lawyers and social pressure. You've never encountered someone who solves problems with methods that your world doesn't acknowledge. I poured the whiskey into a glass and took a sip, my eyes never leaving Bryce's face. This whiskey was a gift from my father-in-law when Leo was born. I was saving it for a special occasion. Thank you for helping me realize that tonight qualifies. Bryce found his voice, though it shook slightly. What do you want? I want you to disappear from our lives completely. I want you to find a new job in a new city and never contact Sarah again. I want you to understand that if you ever do anything that affects my son's safety or well-being, the consequences will be permanent. And if I refuse, I finish the whiskey and set the glass down with deliberate care. Then you'll discover that some problems can't be solved with lawyers or police reports. You'll learn that there are people in this world who understand that certain actions require responses that exist outside the boundaries of civilized society. I moved toward the door, then paused. Bryce, I'm going to give you some advice that might save your life. You're used to dealing with people who play by rules, who have reputations to protect and careers to consider. I'm not one of those people. I'm someone who's comfortable with depths that will kill you, who's made decisions in life or death situations that would paralyze you with fear. I opened the door, then turned back one final time. You have 48 hours to make the right choice. I suggest you use them wisely. As I left the building, I felt the familiar satisfaction of a problem assessed, analyzed, and addressed with appropriate measures. Bryce Maxwell was no longer a threat. The man's entire demeanor had confirmed that he lacked the spine to challenge someone who operated outside his comfortable world of corporate politics and social manipulation. Now it was time to deal with Sarah. Sarah was waiting in the driveway when I returned home, her face a mask of fury and fear. She'd obviously spoken to Bryce, and the conversation hadn't gone well for either of them. What did you do to him? She demanded as I stepped out of my truck. I had a conversation with the man who's been making decisions about my family's welfare. Nothing more. Bryce called me crying, Matt. Crying? I said. You threatened to kill him. I paused at the front door, key in hand. Did I? That doesn't sound like something I'd say. I prefer to be more precise in my communications. Sarah grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. This isn't a joke. You can't terrorize people just because you're angry. I looked down at her hand on my arm, then back at her face. The touch that had once comforted me now felt like a violation. Sarah, I need you to understand something. I'm not angry. Anger is an emotion, and emotions make you sloppy. What I am is committed to protecting my son from people who've demonstrated they can't be trusted with his safety. Our son, number Leo, is my son. You forfeited your claim when you chose your lover over your child's well-being. Sarah released my arm, stepping back as if slapped. I made one mistake, Matt. One night where my judgment was impaired. Your judgment wasn't impaired, Sarah. Your priorities were just finally visible. I entered the house, and Sarah followed, her desperation growing. Matt, please, we can fix this. I'll end things with Bryce. We can go to counseling, whatever you need. I turned to face her in our living room, the room where we'd planned our future, where Leo had taken his first steps, where I had once believed I was building something permanent and good. Sarah, let me ask you something. When Bryce suggested leaving Leo alone that night, what did you say? Sarah's silence was answer enough. Did you object? Did you insist on finding proper childcare? Did you even hesitate? It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. You prioritized your affair over your child's safety. And the only reason Leo wasn't seriously hurt was pure luck. That's not a mistake, Sarah. That's a fundamental failure of character. Sarah sank into the couch where they'd once watched movies together, where she'd fallen asleep against his shoulder during Leo's infancy. So what happens now? You destroy my life because I fell in love with someone else? I considered the question with the same methodical approach I brought to everything else. I'm not destroying your life, Sarah. I'm protecting my son's life. There's a difference. And Bryce? What about what you did to him? Bryce made the same choice you did. He prioritized his desires over a child's safety. Now he's learned that choices have consequences. Sarah's desperation transformed into something uglier. You think you're so righteous, don't you? The perfect father, the devoted husband. But you were never here, Matt. You chose that rig over your family every single day. I felt something cold settle in my chest. I chose to provide for my family. I chose to work a dangerous job so you could stay home with Leo when he was born, so you could pursue your career without financial pressure, so we could build the life you said you wanted. I never asked for that life. Number. But you took it. You took the house, the security, the comfortable lifestyle. You just didn't want the responsibility that came with it. Sarah stood up, her composure finally shattering completely. I won't let you take Leo from me. I'll fight you in court. I'll tell them about your threats, your violence. I moved closer, and Sarah stopped mid-sentence. Sarah, you need to listen very carefully. I have documentation of your abandonment of Leo. I have the burner phone with text messages proving your affair. I have testimony from Child Protective Services about finding our son wandering the streets alone while you were with Bryce. My voice remained steady, but something in my eyes made Sarah back toward the wall. More importantly, I have 8 years of documentation showing my commitment to this family, my financial support, my safety record, my reputation in the community. What do you have? Sarah's face crumpled, but I continued with relentless precision. You have a pattern of irresponsible behavior, culminating in child abandonment. You have an affair with a man whose financial situation will crumble under legal scrutiny. You have no independent income, no stable housing, and no credible explanation for why our son was found alone in the middle of the night. Matt, please! I'm not trying to hurt you, Sarah. I'm trying to protect Leo from people who've proven they can't prioritize his well-being over their own desires. I moved to the window, looking out at the neighborhood where we'd once planned to raise our family. Here's what's going to happen. You'll have supervised visitation rights until Leo turns 18. Child support will be determined by the court based on your actual earning capacity, not the lifestyle Bryce was financing. You'll move out by this weekend. And if I refuse? I turned back to her, and Sarah saw something in my expression that made her understand why men twice my size deferred to my authority on the research vessel. Then I'll ensure that every aspect of your relationship with Bryce becomes public record. His financial irregularities, your abandonment of Leo, the complete timeline of your affair. Bryce's career won't survive that kind of scrutiny, and neither will any claim you might have to being a fit parent. Sarah slumped against the wall, defeated. I loved you once. I know, I loved you too. But love without responsibility is just selfishness wearing a prettier name. I walked to the front door and held it open. You have until Friday to collect your belongings. After that, all communication goes through Ben Carter. Sarah walked to the door, then paused. Leo will ask about me. Yes, he will. And I'll tell him the truth, that sometimes people make choices that hurt the people who love them and that actions have consequences. Matt, goodbye. After she left, I locked the door and went to check on Leo, who was still at the Hendersons but will be home tomorrow. The house felt different now. Not empty, but clean, like a job site after all the safety hazards had been identified and removed. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Bryce. Mr. Davis, this is Bryce. Sarah told me about your conversation tonight. I want you to know that I'm taking a position with a company in Seattle. We'll be gone by the end of the week. I smiled grimly and deleted the message. Bryce had learned the lesson. Some people responded to reason. Others required a demonstration of consequences. The key was matching the approach to the individual. My phone rang. Mac Henderson checking in. How'd it go? Problem solved. Leo and I will be fine. Good. Linda's got dinner ready if you want to come get your boy. I looked around the house that was now truly mine, and Leo's. Tomorrow, I'd start the process of rebuilding our life without the people who threatened its foundation. Tell Linda we'll be there in 20 minutes. And Mac, thank you. That's what family does, Matt. Real family. 3 weeks later, my life has settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable for the first time in months. Leo had adapted to Sarah's absence with the resilience of childhood, especially after I explained that sometimes grown-ups made mistakes that meant they couldn't live together anymore, but that didn't change how much Daddy loved him. The custody hearing had been a formality. Sarah's lawyer had advised her not to contest my petition after reviewing the evidence, and Bryce's sudden departure to Seattle had eliminated her primary emotional support. She'd accepted supervised visitation every other weekend, a hollow victory that neither she nor I pretended was satisfying. I was home for a 2-week shore leave when the first surprise arrived, a visit from Detective Ray Foster of the Seattle Police Department. Foster was a compact man in his 40s with the tired eyes of someone who'd seen enough domestic situations go bad to recognize patterns. Mr. Davis, I'd like to ask you a few questions about Bryce Maxwell. I invited the detective in, noting the way Foster observed everything. The family photos, Leo's toys, the orderly but lived-in quality of a home where someone actually cared about the environment they were creating for a child. Can I ask what this is about? Mr. Maxwell filed a complaint, alleging that you threatened him with physical violence during a visit to his apartment 3 weeks ago. I considered this information with the same methodical approach I brought to all problems. I did visit Bryce's apartment. We had a conversation about his relationship with my wife and how it was affecting my son. According to Mr. Maxwell, you physically assaulted him and threatened to kill him if he didn't leave town. That's interesting. Did Bryce mention that he was drinking whiskey that he'd stolen from my home? Whiskey that my wife brought to his apartment while she was supposed to be caring for our 5-year-old son? Foster made a note. Mr. Maxwell also claims you've been investigating his personal finances and making threats about exposing confidential information. I smiled slightly. Detective, I'm curious. What did Bryce tell you about the circumstances that led to our conversation? He said there was a marital dispute. Did he mention that my son was found wandering downtown at midnight because Bryce and my wife left him alone to pursue their affair? Foster's pen stopped moving. Come again? I retrieved the file I'd prepared for the custody hearing. Police reports, Child Protective Services, documentation, hospital records proving Mrs. Henderson's absence, and the text messages from Sarah's burner phone. My son was abandoned by his mother and her lover so they could spend the night together. When I came home early from my offshore rotation to handle the emergency, I felt it was appropriate to discuss the situation with the man who'd helped convince my wife to neglect our child's safety. Foster reviewed the documents, his expression growing increasingly serious. This report says your son was found alone at midnight in a downtown parking garage. That's correct. Bryce and my wife thought I was trapped offshore and wouldn't discover their actions for 3 weeks. They were wrong. In your conversation with Mr. Maxwell, the detective's eyes fixed directly on mine. I explained to Bryce that his decisions had endangered my son and that such behavior needed to stop immediately. I also suggested that he might be happier pursuing his career in a different city, given the complications his presence was creating for all involved. Did you threaten him with violence? I explained that men who endanger children sometimes face consequences that exist outside the normal social framework. Bryce appeared to understand the concept. Foster closed his notebook and studied me for a long moment. Mr. Davis, I have to ask, did you physically harm Bryce Maxwell or explicitly threaten to kill him? No, detective. I had a frank conversation with a man about the consequences of his choices. If Bryce interpreted that as a threat, perhaps it's because he recognized the gravity of what he'd done. Foster stood up, gathering his materials. Miss Davis, I've seen a lot of domestic situations go sideways, but I've also seen what happens when people who should protect children choose not to. Bryce Maxwell struck me as a man who was more upset about facing consequences than about what those consequences were for. I walked the detective to the door. Will there be charges? Not from my department. Bryce's complaint doesn't align with the evidence of what actually happened here. A man has the right to express his concerns to someone who endangered his child, especially when those concerns are expressed without violence. After Foster left, I felt the familiar satisfaction of a problem handled with appropriate precision. Bryce had tried to use the legal system to continue his pattern of avoiding consequences, but the truth had proven more compelling than his manipulation. That evening, Leo was building with his blocks when he looked up at me with the serious expression that meant he was working through something complicated. Daddy, why did Mommy leave? I set down my book and moved to the floor beside my son. Sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt other people, buddy. Mommy chose to spend time with someone else instead of taking care of you, and that's not okay. Is she coming back? She'll visit sometimes, but she won't live here anymore. It's just going to be you and me. Leo considered this with 5-year-old logic. Will she make better choices now? I looked at my son, this small person who deserved protection and honesty, and the security of knowing that at least one parent would never prioritize anything above his well-being. I don't know, Leo, but I promise you that Daddy will always make choices that keep you safe. Leo nodded with the acceptance that children granted to explanations that felt true, even when they were painful. Can we finish the tower? Absolutely. As we built together, I reflected on the past month. Sarah and Bryce had tried to construct their relationship on a foundation of selfishness and deception, and that foundation had crumbled the moment it faced real pressure. But Leo and I were building something different. A life based on honesty, responsibility, and the understanding that some things were worth protecting at any cost. The tower we constructed that evening was sturdy and straight, built with patience and precision. Like everything else I intended to build for my son's future. 2 months after Bryce's departure, I received a phone call that changed everything. The caller was Special Agent Clara Chen from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, and her first words immediately captured my attention. Mr. Davis, we need to discuss Bryce Maxwell and your wife's relationship with him. We met at a downtown coffee shop, I choosing a corner table where I could observe the entire room, a habit from years of working in environments where situational awareness was survival. Agent Chen was younger than I expected, with the sharp intelligence of someone who'd built a career on seeing patterns that others missed. Mr. Davis, we've been investigating Bryce Maxwell for financial fraud, money laundering, and identity theft. Your wife's relationship with him has become relevant to our case. I felt pieces clicking into place with mechanical precision. How so? Sarah provided Bryce with access to financial information about your family, bank accounts, investment portfolios, insurance policies, information that Bryce used to establish false identities and fraudulent credit accounts. The coffee shop suddenly felt too warm. Explain. Agent Chen opened a thick folder, revealing bank statements, credit applications, and photographs of documents that I recognize as my personal financial records. Bryce's pattern is sophisticated. He cultivates relationships with women who have access to their husband's financial information, particularly men who work in high-paying, travel-intensive jobs, oil workers, merchant marines, long-haul pilots, men who are away for extended periods and might not immediately notice irregularities. I studied the documents, seeing my own signature forged on loan applications, my social security number used to open accounts I'd never seen. Sarah provided all of this? Unknowingly, we believe. Bryce convinced her to photograph documents for insurance purposes during your marriage, claiming he wanted to help her organize your financial planning. She thought she was being helpful. I felt a cold fury building that had nothing to do with emotion and everything to do with the methodical rage of someone who discovered a systematic violation of everything he'd built. How much damage? Total exposure is approximately $200,000 across 17 fraudulent accounts. Bryce was sophisticated. He made payments just long enough to establish credit history, then disappeared before the accounts went into default. Agent Chen pulled out more documents. But here's where it gets interesting. Bryce made a mistake when he fled to Seattle. He tried to establish the same pattern with a new victim, but we were already tracking his methods. When we arrested him, he immediately offered to provide information about his previous victims in exchange for a reduced sentence. And Sarah? Unknowing accomplice at most. Bryce is the predator here, not your wife. But we need your cooperation to build the case. I leaned back in my chair, processing the implications. Sarah hadn't just been cheating. She'd been systematically manipulated by a professional criminal who'd used her emotions to gain access to my carefully built financial security. What kind of cooperation? Testimony about the timeline of their relationship, documentation of any financial irregularities you noticed. And, Agent Chen paused, we understand you had a confrontational conversation with Bryce before he left town. We need to know exactly what was said. I smiled grimly. I told Bryce that men who endangered children faced consequences outside normal social frameworks. I suggested he might prefer to pursue opportunities elsewhere. Did you threaten him with violence? I explained reality to him. Bryce chose to interpret that as a threat. Agent Chen made notes. Bryce claims you physically assaulted him and threatened to kill him, but his story doesn't match the evidence or his behavior afterward. What do you mean? If someone actually threatened your life, you call the police immediately. Bryce waited 3 weeks, then filed a complaint only after we arrested him in Seattle. That suggests his accusations are more about creating leverage than reporting genuine crimes. I felt pieces of a larger puzzle falling into place. Bryce hadn't just been a predator targeting Sarah. He'd been a professional criminal who'd used their marriage as cover for systematic financial fraud. The abandonment of Leo had been incidental to Bryce's real purpose, using Sarah's emotional vulnerability to gain access to my financial information. Mr. Davis, there's something else. Bryce's pattern suggests he's done this before, multiple times, in multiple cities. We believe he's responsible for at least 12 similar cases over the past 5 years. I thought about the other men like myself, hard-working individuals who trusted their wives with financial information, only to discover that trust had been weaponized against them by a professional manipulator. What do you need from me? Full cooperation with our investigation, documentation of all financial irregularities, testimony about Bryce's behavior and your interactions with him. I considered the request. Cooperation would mean revisiting the worst period of my life, reliving Sarah's betrayal and the danger that had been posed to Leo. But it would also mean ensuring that Bryce faced consequences for a pattern of criminal behavior that extended far beyond what he'd done to my family. Agent Chen, I have one condition, which is, I want to speak with the other victims, the other families Bryce targeted. That's unusual. These men deserve to know that Bryce's pattern was professional, not personal. They deserve to understand that their wives were victims too, manipulated by someone who does this for a living. Agent Chen studied me for a long moment. You want to help them? I want them to understand what really happened to their families, the same way you've helped me understand what really happened to mine. Mr. Davis, most of these families didn't survive intact. The financial damage combined with the marital betrayal, it destroys people. I thought about Leo, about the life we were building together, about the importance of understanding the difference between genuine betrayal and professional manipulation. All the more reason they deserve the truth. Agent Chen closed her folder. We'll arrange meetings with the victims who consent to participate. But, Mr. Davis, you should know, testifying against Bryce will require revisiting everything that happened. Are you prepared for that? I thought about the systematic way Bryce had targeted my family, the professional calculation behind what I had interpreted as simple adultery and child endangerment. Agent Chen, Bryce made one fundamental mistake in his assessment of me, which was he assumed I was like his other victims, someone who would be destroyed by his manipulation and too broken to fight back effectively. I stood up, my decision made. He was wrong. I'm not broken, and I'm definitely going to fight back. The meeting with Bryce's other victims took place in a federal building conference room. 11 men whose stories formed a pattern of professional predation that was both systematic and devastating. I recognized the look in their eyes, the hollow exhaustion of people who lost not just money but their faith in their own judgment. Agent Chen facilitated the introductions, explaining how Bryce's operation had worked. Each victim fit the same profile: hardworking men in high-paying, travel-intensive jobs who trusted their wives with financial access. Bryce had targeted the wives with surgical precision, identifying women who felt isolated by their husbands' work schedules and vulnerable to attention from a charming, sophisticated man. Michael Vance, a merchant marine captain, spoke first. Maria thought she was helping organize our finances. Bryce convinced her that I was hiding assets, that she needed to document everything to protect herself in case something happened to me. Jim Peterson, a long-haul pilot, nodded grimly. Same story. Rebecca thought Bryce was a financial advisor helping her understand our investments. She gave him access to everything. One by one, the stories emerged, each a variation on the same theme. Bryce would cultivate relationships with isolated wives, convince them their husbands were financially irresponsible or potentially unfaithful, then position himself as both emotional support and financial advisor. The women would provide access to accounts, documents, and personal information, believing they were protecting their families. I listened to each story, recognizing elements of my own experience, but understanding now that Sarah's betrayal had been part of a larger, more calculated operation. How many marriages survived? I asked. The silence was answer enough. Of the 12 families Bryce had targeted, only 3 marriages remained intact, and those were hanging by threads. Bryce was good at finding pressure points, Agent Chen explained. He didn't just steal money, he destroyed trust. Even when wives realized they'd been manipulated, the husbands often couldn't separate the betrayal from the manipulation. I thought about Sarah, about the gradual changes in her behavior that I'd attributed to simple infidelity. Now I understood that she'd been systematically groomed by a professional who understood exactly how to exploit her vulnerabilities. The difference in your case, Mr. Davis, Agent Chen continued, is Bryce made a crucial error. He endangered your child. The other men looked at me with something approaching envy. Their stories were purely financial and emotional. Mine had included a clear threat to Leo's safety that had given me moral justification for my response. Bryce's pattern is to disappear before consequences catch up with him, Agent Chen explained, but your confrontation forced him to make desperate moves that led to his arrest. Without your intervention, he might have disappeared completely. Michael Vance leaned forward. What exactly did you say to him? I considered the question carefully. These men deserved honesty about methods they might not have considered. I explained that men who endangered children face consequences outside normal social frameworks. I suggested he might prefer to pursue opportunities elsewhere, and he left within 48 hours. Jim Peterson laughed bitterly. I hired lawyers, filed police reports, went through proper channels. Rebecca and I are still in counseling, and the financial damage will take years to repair. You had one conversation, and the problem disappeared. I felt no satisfaction in the comparison. The situation was different because of Leo. When someone threatens a child's safety, the rules change. Maybe the rules should change more often, Vance muttered. Agent Chen intervened before the conversation could drift toward vigilante justice. The important thing now is ensuring Bryce faces appropriate consequences through the legal system. Mr. Davis's approach worked in his specific situation, but is not a model for general application. The meeting continued for 2 hours, with each victim providing testimony that would contribute to the federal case against Bryce. As the session concluded, I realized that my experience with Bryce had been both unique and typical. Unique in its resolution, typical in its pattern. After the other victims left, Agent Chen walked me to the elevator. Mr. Davis, I have to ask, do you regret how you handled the situation with Bryce? I considered the question. Do I regret protecting my son from someone who endangered his safety? And number, do I regret that it took a threat to make Bryce face consequences for his actions? Yes, the other victims don't have your resolution. They're still living with the damage Bryce caused. They're still living with uncertainty about what really happened to them. Once Bryce is convicted, they'll have closure. That's something. Is it enough? I stepped into the elevator, then turned back to Agent Chen. Agent Chen, those men lost more than money. They lost their ability to trust their own judgment, their faith in their marriages, their confidence in their ability to protect their families. Bryce didn't just commit financial fraud, he committed emotional terrorism. And you think he should face consequences beyond what the federal system will provide? My expression remained neutral. I think Bryce should face consequences proportional to the damage he's caused. Whether that happens through federal court or through other means is up to the universe to decide. The elevator doors closed before Agent Chen could respond, leaving me alone with the knowledge that Bryce's trial was still months away and that justice deferred was often justice denied. But I was a patient man, skilled at working in hostile environments where timing and precision mattered more than speed. Bryce would face consequences for what he'd done. The only question was whether those consequences would come from the federal court system or from the universe's more direct methods of balancing accounts. Either way, I would be ready. Bryce Maxwell's federal trial began on a crisp October morning 6 months after his arrest in Seattle. I sat in the courtroom gallery, watching the man who'd nearly destroyed my family face the methodical presentation of evidence that would determine his fate. Bryce looked smaller somehow, diminished by the orange jumpsuit and the weight of facing consequences he couldn't charm or manipulate his way out of. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. 17 victims, $200,000 in fraudulent charges, and a pattern of behavior stretching back 5 years. Bryce's defense attorney attempted to portray him as a man who'd made poor decisions during emotional crisis, but the evidence painted a different picture. A professional predator who'd systematically targeted vulnerable families. I testified on the third day, my voice steady as I described Bryce's infiltration of my marriage and the abandonment of Leo that had precipitated our confrontation. Defense counsel tried to paint me as a violent man who'd intimidated their client, but my calm recounting of facts made Bryce's accusations sound like the desperate deflections they were. "Mr. Davis," the defense attorney pressed, "isn't it true that you threatened to kill my client if he didn't leave town?" I met the lawyer's eyes directly. I explained to Mr. Maxwell that men who endangered children sometimes faced consequences outside normal social frameworks. If he interpreted that as a death threat, perhaps he understood the gravity of what he'd done. That sounds like a threat to me. That sounds like a warning to me. There's a difference. The judge intervened before the exchange could escalate, but my point had been made. Bryce had endangered a child and faced consequences for that choice. The jury's expression suggested they understood the distinction. Sarah testified the following day, looking fragile and tired, as she described how Bryce had systematically gained her trust and access to my financial information. Her testimony was devastating to Bryce's case, painting him not as a lover caught up in an affair, but as a calculating predator who'd used her emotions as tools for theft. "Did you love Bryce Maxwell?" the prosecutor asked. Sarah's voice was barely audible. I thought I did, but I realize now that I was in love with someone who never existed. Bryce created a persona designed to manipulate me. "Do you regret your relationship with him?" Sarah looked directly at me for the first time since entering the courtroom. "I regret every decision that put my son at risk. I regret betraying my husband's trust. I regret being naive enough to be used by someone like Bryce." I felt no satisfaction in Sarah's obvious pain. She'd been a victim too, manipulated by someone who understood exactly how to exploit her vulnerabilities. But victimization didn't excuse the choice to abandon Leo, and my expression remained neutral as she left the witness stand. The trial concluded after 2 weeks, with Bryce's conviction on all charges. The judge sentenced him to 8 years in federal prison and ordered restitution to all victims, money that most of them would never see, since Bryce had spent their stolen funds maintaining his fraudulent lifestyle. Outside the courthouse, Sarah approached me as I waited for my ride. "Matt, can we talk?" We walked to a nearby park where we'd once brought Leo to play during happier times. Sarah looked older than her 31 years, worn down by months of legal proceedings and the collapse of everything she thought she understood about her life. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," she began, "but I need you to understand that I never meant for any of this to happen." I studied her face, seeing genuine remorse but also the fundamental weakness that had made her vulnerable to Bryce's manipulation. "Sarah, I understand that you were manipulated, but you still made choices. You chose to trust Bryce over me. You chose to leave Leo alone to pursue your affair. Being manipulated doesn't excuse those choices. I know. I've been in therapy, trying to understand how I let this happen." "How's that going?" Sarah's laugh was bitter. My therapist says I have issues with abandonment and validation, seeking that made me vulnerable to someone like Bryce. Apparently, my childhood prepared me perfectly to be victimized by a professional manipulator. I felt a flicker of sympathy for the woman I'd once loved. That explains the vulnerability, but not the choices. No, it doesn't. Sarah sat on a park bench, looking out at the playground where Leo had once played. Matt, I want you to know that I understand why you did what you did, why you couldn't forgive me, why you had to protect Leo from me. Do you? You saw me clearly before I saw myself clearly. You recognized that I was someone who would prioritize my own emotional needs over my child's safety, and you acted to prevent that from happening again. I joined her on the bench, maintaining a careful distance. Sarah, I didn't want to destroy our marriage. I wanted to protect our son from people who had proven they couldn't be trusted with his well-being. I know, and you were right. Sarah wiped her eyes with a tissue. I've been seeing Leo every other weekend for 6 months, and you know what I've realized? What? He's better off with just you. He's more confident, more secure, more trusting. I damaged him by prioritizing Bryce over his safety, and you've spent months repairing that damage. I thought about Leo's progress over the past months. My son had thrived in the stable environment I had created, secure in the knowledge that his father would never prioritize anything above his well-being. Leo still loves you, Sarah. I know, but love isn't enough, is it? Love without reliability is just another way of hurting people. We sat in silence for several minutes, watching other families play in the park we'd once enjoyed together. Matt, I have a favor to ask. What? I'm moving to Phoenix. My sister offered me a job with her real estate company. A chance to start over, somewhere that doesn't have memories of Bryce and the mess I made. I felt neither surprise nor sadness at this news. What about Leo? I'll still see him during holidays and summer breaks if that's okay with you. But I think he needs consistency more than he needs a mother who's still figuring out how to be trustworthy. I respected the honesty of her self-assessment. Are you sure? I'm sure that Leo deserves a parent who puts his needs first. Always. You've proven you're that parent. I'm still learning how to be. Sarah stood up, shouldering the purse that had once held the burner phone Bryce had given her. Matt, will you tell Leo that I love him, but that I need to go away for a while to become the kind of person who deserves to be his mother? I stood as well, seeing the woman I'd married and recognizing that she was finally taking responsibility for her choices, even if it was too late to save our family. I'll tell him you love him enough to make sure he's safe, even if that means making difficult choices. Sarah nodded, tears flowing freely now. Thank you for protecting him, for seeing clearly when I couldn't, for being the father he deserves. She walked away without looking back, and I watched her disappear into the crowd of people living lives that hadn't been shattered by professional predators and personal failures. That evening, I sat with Leo as we built another elaborate tower, this one incorporating elements of real architecture that I had been teaching my son. Leo worked with the methodical precision that reminded me of myself, carefully planning each level before committing to placement. Daddy, is Mommy coming to see me this weekend? I had been dreading this conversation. But Leo deserved honesty. Mommy's moving to Phoenix to live with Aunt Carol. She won't be visiting every weekend anymore, but she'll still see you during holidays. Leo considered this information with 5-year-old logic. Is she moving because of the bad choices? Partly, but also because she wants to learn how to make better choices, and sometimes people need space to figure things out. Will she make better choices in Phoenix? I looked at my son, the small person who'd survived abandonment, family dissolution, and exposure to adult complications with remarkable resilience. I hope so, buddy. But even if she doesn't, you and I are going to keep making good choices together. Leo nodded with the acceptance that children granted to explanations that felt true, even when they were complicated. Can we make the tower taller? Absolutely. As we built together, I reflected on the past year. Bryce was in federal prison, facing 8 years of consequences for his professional predation. Sarah was moving away to rebuild her life without the constant reminder of her failures. And Leo and I were constructing something new and strong from the foundation that had survived when everything else crumbled. The tower we built that evening was the tallest yet, steady and straight, and built to last. Like everything else, I intended to build for my son's future. In the deep waters of offshore exploration, I had learned that pressure either crushed you or taught you how to be stronger. The pressure Bryce had brought to our family had revealed weaknesses that needed to be addressed and strengths that could be built upon. Now, in the calm that followed the storm, Leo and I were building our future with the kind of methodical precision that could withstand whatever pressures the deep waters of life might bring. And I was finally, truly at peace